July 28, 1945. 03:12 hours. Tinian Island, North Field Briefing Room. Major Robert Calhoun knew something was wrong the moment he walked into the briefing. The intelligence officers who normally ran these sessions with board efficiency were standing too stiff. Colonel Hayes, the squadron commander, kept glancing at a folder on the table like it contained something toxic, and there were two men in civilian clothes sitting in the back row who Calhoun had never seen before. In 9 months and 146 combat missions over Japan, Calhoun had attended enough briefings to recognize when someone was lying. This briefing reeked of lies. The target map showed Osaka Industrial District. Standard stuff. Railway yards, manufacturing plants, warehouse complexes. The kind of target they hit every other week. But when Lieutenant Morrison, the intelligence officer, started reading the coordinates, his voice caught. Just for a second. A tiny hesitation that most of the crew probably missed. Calhoun did not miss it. He sat in the third row between his co-pilot David Chen and his bombardier James Whitaker. Around them, 50 other crew members from the squadron sprawled in folding chairs, some drinking coffee, some smoking, all of them looking like men who had stopped caring about their own survival months ago. "Target is Osaka District 7, Morrison said, tapping the map with a wooden pointer. "Intelligence indicates concentration of war production facilities, machine tool factories, bearing plants, a steel rolling mill. Standard incendiary load, 48 M69 clusters per aircraft. Expected opposition is light. Weather over target is clear. Any questions?" Calhoun raised his hand. "What is in Sector 9? Morrison blinked. "Sector 9 is not part of the target area." "I know. I am asking what is there." "Residential zones. Not relevant to this mission." "And Sector 8, the area between 7 and 9? Morrison looked at Colonel Hayes. Hayes looked at the two civilians in the back. One of them gave a tiny headshake. "Also residential," Morrison said. "Major Calhoun, your bomb run will be northwest to southeast. You will not be anywhere near Sectors 8 or 9. It was a lie. Calhoun had flown enough missions over Osaka to know the district layouts. Sector 7 bordered directly on Sector 8. Wind patterns would push an incendiary firestorm straight through both sectors within an hour of the initial bombing. Morrison knew this. Hayes knew this. Everyone in the room with more than 20 missions knew this. So why were they pretending otherwise? The briefing ended at 03:45 hours. Calhoun waited until most of the crews had filed out, then approached Colonel Hayes. The two civilians were gone. Hayes was rolling up the target maps with hands that moved a little too fast. "Sir," Calhoun said quietly, "what is really in Osaka Sector 8? Hayes stopped rolling the maps. He did not look at Calhoun. "Major, you have your target coordinates. You have your mission profile. That is all you need to know. With respect, sir, if there is something in that sector that affects mission planning, I need to know what it is." Hayes finally looked at him. His face was the face of a man who had not slept well in a very long time. "Robert, you are a good pilot, one of the best I have. You have flown 146 missions and brought your crew back alive every single time. Do not overthink this. Hit your target. Come home. That is the job." Calhoun felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You are not answering my question." "No," Hayes said, "I am not. And you are not going to ask it again." They stared at each other for 5 seconds. Then Calhoun saluted and walked out. He found his crew at the hard stand where Lady Luck waited under portable floodlights. Most of them were going through pre-flight checks with the mechanical focus of men who had done this so many times it required no conscious thought. But Whitaker, the bombardier, was sitting on the tarmac with his back against the nose wheel, staring at nothing. Calhoun sat down beside him. "You all right?" Whitaker did not answer immediately. He was 23 years old, from Ohio, married with a 2-year-old daughter he had never met. He had flown 87 missions. Before the war, he had been studying to be a Presbyterian minister. "I had a dream last night," Whitaker said finally. "I was dropping bombs, and I could see through the clouds. I could see people running, kids, old people. They were looking up at me, and I could see their faces. It was just a dream," Calhoun said. "Was it?" Whitaker turned to look at him. "We have burned 23 Japanese cities in the last 6 months. How many people do you think we have killed?" "I do not know. Hundreds of thousands. Maybe more. And every single time we do it, they tell us we are hitting military targets, industrial zones, war production facilities. But Bob, you have seen the bomb damage photos. Whole neighborhoods gone, miles and miles of ash. Those are not factories. Those are homes." Calhoun said nothing. What could he say? Whitaker was right. They both knew it. "I keep thinking about my daughter," Whitaker continued. "Sarah, she is 2 years old. My wife sends me pictures. Sarah has this smile, this perfect innocent smile. And I think there are 2-year-old Japanese kids too, with the same smile, and we are burning them alive." Calhoun put a hand on Whitaker's shoulder. "If you cannot fly this mission, I will get you pulled. No questions, no judgment." Whitaker shook his head. "No, I am going. We all are. Because if we do not, someone else will. At least you bring us back alive. At least with you, we have a chance." They sat in silence for another minute. Then Whitaker stood up and climbed into the aircraft. Calhoun thought about his own family. His father had been a Quaker, a pacifist who had refused to serve in the First World War and spent 2 years in federal prison for it. Calhoun had grown up listening to his father talk about the sin of killing, the evil of war, the moral cowardice of men who claimed they were just following orders. His father had died in 1943 before Calhoun deployed overseas. Calhoun wondered what the old man would think if he could see his son now. 29 years old, 146 bombing missions, cities burned, people killed by the thousands, just following orders. The takeoff happened at 0530 hours. 24 B-29 bombers lifting into the pre-dawn darkness, each one carrying enough incendiary bombs to burn a city block down to bedrock. Calhoun flew the departure procedure on autopilot, his hands on the controls but his mind somewhere else. His wife Margaret had sent him a letter last week. It was sitting in his footlocker back at the barracks, read so many times the paper was starting to tear along the creases. She had written about their neighborhood in Chicago, about how everyone was putting up flags and yellow ribbons, about how proud everyone was of the boys overseas who were winning the war. She had written, "I tell everyone my husband is a hero. I tell them you are saving lives. That is true, is it not? You are saving American lives?" Calhoun had not answered that letter yet. He did not know how. The formation joined up over the ocean. 24 aircraft in tight box formation. Calhoun flew position 3 in the lead element. The sun rose behind them, turning the Pacific into a sheet of hammered gold. It was beautiful. Calhoun felt nothing. 3 hours into the flight, Chen the co-pilot said quietly, "You think Hayes was lying about something?" Calhoun glanced at him. "Why do you ask?" "Because I've been flying with you for 9 months and I've never seen you push back on a briefing before. So either you are losing your nerve or something about this mission bothers you." Calhoun watched the horizon. "Maybe both. You want to abort?" "We could claim mechanical issues." "Turn back." "No. We are going to fly the mission." "Why?" "Because, Chen, if we do not drop these bombs, the plane behind us will, and the plane behind them, and the plane behind them. The only choice we have is whether we survive it." Chen was quiet for a moment. That is a pretty bleak way to look at it. You have a better one? Chen shook his head. At 09:15 hours, they reached the initial point. Bombardier Whitaker took control through the Norden bomb site. Calhoun kept his hands light on the controls, ready to take over if fighters attacked or flak got too heavy. But the sky was clear, the anti-aircraft fire was light and inaccurate. Everything was going according to plan, which made Calhoun even more uneasy. "Bomb bay doors open," Whitaker said over the intercom. 30 seconds to release." Calhoun looked down. Through breaks in the haze, he could see Osaka below them. The city spread out like a model on a table. He could see streets, buildings, the distinctive grid pattern of the industrial district. And yes, he could see the residential areas right next to it. Sector 8, Sector 9. Houses packed together. Thousands of them. 10 seconds, Whitaker said. His voice was flat, emotionless. The voice of a man who had learned to shut down everything human inside himself. 5 seconds. Bombs away. 48 incendiary clusters dropped from Lady Luck. 2 tons of napalm and magnesium falling toward the city at terminal velocity. Behind them, 23 other B-29s released their loads. Over 46,000 individual bomblets. Enough fire to burn everything for miles. Calhoun banked hard left and dove away from the target area. Standard procedure. Do not wait around to watch, get out, get home, survive. But as Lady Luck turned south, something caught his eye. A building in Sector 8, right at the edge of where the fires would spread. He grabbed the binoculars from the rack beside his seat and focused on it. The building was large, surrounded by barbed wire fences. It looked like a prison camp or an internment facility. And flying from a pole on the roof, barely visible through the smoke that was already starting to rise, was a flag. A white flag with a red cross. No, not a red cross. Calhoun adjusted the focus, his hand suddenly shaking. It was an American flag. There were Americans down there. American prisoners. Right in the zone that was about to become an inferno. Right where 46,000 incendiary bombs were about to create a firestorm with temperatures hot enough to melt steel. And nobody had told them. "Bob?" Chen said. "What is wrong? What do you see?" Calhoun lowered the binoculars. His mouth was dry. His heart was pounding. "Nothing," he said. "I do not see anything." Behind them, Osaka began to burn. November 3rd, 1953. 14:20 hours. Pentagon, Arlington, Virginia. Records Management Office. Major Robert Calhoun found the document on page 37 of a July 1945 intelligence summary that should have been destroyed 8 years ago. His hand started shaking before he finished reading the first paragraph. Sector 8. Compound identification. Signals. Intelligence confirms presence of enemy prisoner of war detention facility. Estimated prisoner population 87 individuals. Nationality American and Allied. Facility located 400 meters east of primary industrial targets, Sector 7. Fire spread from incendiary operations will impact facility. They had known. Command had known there were American prisoners right next to his target, and they had sent him anyway. Calhoun kept digging through the box of classified files, found a memo dated July 22nd, 6 days before his mission. The header read, Strategic Air Command to 20th Air Force Operations. Subject, Osaka Mission Authorization. POW Facility Sector 8 presents acceptable risk given strategic value of industrial targets Sector 7. Mission approved. POW location classified top secret. Information will not be disclosed to combat crews. Acceptable risk. That was the phrase they had used. 87 American lives were acceptable risk. Calhoun heard footsteps in the corridor outside. He shoved the documents inside his uniform jacket and closed the file box. The door opened. Colonel Walter Barnes walked in. Barnes was 52 years old, spent the war flying a desk in Washington, and now ran the Pentagon Historical Records Division. "Working late, Major?" Barnes said. His voice was pleasant, but his eyes were not. "Yes, sir. Research project. Find anything interesting?" Barnes was looking at the file box, the one labeled Osaka Operations, July 1945, the one that was supposed to be restricted access. Calhoun had signed it out using a forged authorization code 3 hours ago. "Just routine mission reports, sir. Nothing special." Barnes walked closer. He moved like a man who had something unpleasant to do and wanted to get it over with. "Major Calhoun, I received a call this afternoon from Document Security. Apparently someone accessed restricted files without proper clearance. Someone using your identification code." Calhoun said nothing. "Those files are classified for a reason," Barnes continued. "Information about prisoner of war casualties can be politically sensitive. Families were told their loved ones died in captivity. Clean deaths. The government decided it was better not to complicate things with details about friendly fire incidents. So you knew," Calhoun said quietly. "You knew Americans died in that raid." Barnes sighed. "Major, I was not in command during the war. I did not make those decisions. But yes, I am aware of what happened at Osaka. Several similar incidents occurred across the Pacific Theater. Strategic bombing creates unavoidable casualties. Command made difficult choices. 87 men, prisoners of war. We killed them." "No," Barnes said sharply. "The Japanese killed them by keeping prisoners near military targets. We bombed legitimate industrial facilities. What happened was tragic, but it was not murder. We knew they were there. We bombed anyway. We did not even tell the crews, because telling the crews would have compromised operational security. Do you think your bombardier could have released those bombs if he knew Americans were below? Do you think any crew could have completed the mission? Command made the only decision that allowed the war to continue." Calhoun felt rage building in his chest. "So we just pretended it did not happen. Told the families their husbands died as heroes, kept the truth buried in classified files." "Yes," Barnes said, "because the alternative was destroying morale and giving ammunition to people who wanted to question the entire strategic bombing campaign. Major, the war is over. We won. Digging up old tragedies serves no purpose. What about the families? What about the wives and children who think their husbands died fighting the enemy? They have closure, they have honor, they have government benefits and the respect of their communities. What would you give them instead? The knowledge that their husbands were killed by mistake? That their sacrifice was meaningless? It was not meaningless. They died. They deserved the truth." Barnes walked to the door and closed it. When he turned back, his pleasant expression was gone. "Major Calhoun, I am going to give you some advice. Those documents you took are classified. Removing them from this office is a federal crime. If you attempt to disclose that information to anyone outside proper channels, you will be court-martialed. Your pension will be revoked. Your family will be destroyed. Do you understand? Are you threatening me? I am explaining reality. The government has spent 8 years building a narrative about the war. A good war. A necessary war. A war where Americans died fighting evil. That narrative is important. It holds things together. If you tear it apart with stories about friendly fire and command decisions that killed our own men, what do you think happens? The truth happens, Calhoun said. No. Chaos happens. Families demand investigations. Congress holds hearings. The press turns it into a scandal. Veterans lose faith in their service. And for what? It will not bring anyone back. It will just cause pain. Calhoun stared at him. You are asking me to lie. I am asking you to think about consequences. You have a wife, a daughter, a career, you have a good life. Do not throw it away for people who are already dead. Barnes opened the door. I expect those documents back on my desk by 0800 tomorrow. This conversation never happened. Are we clear? He walked out without waiting for an answer. Calhoun sat in the empty office with stolen documents hidden in his jacket and thought about consequences. Barnes was right about one thing. Going public would destroy everything, but keeping silent felt like betrayal. 87 men died and the truth was buried, and Calhoun was supposed to just accept that because it was easier. He could not accept that. 2 days later, Calhoun walked into a coffee shop in Georgetown and sat down across from a man named Richard Walsh. Walsh was a reporter for the Washington Post, 40 years old, specialized in investigative stories about government corruption. Calhoun had called him from a payphone and said he had information about war crimes. Walsh had come alone. He sat with a notebook and a cup of coffee and looked at Calhoun with the tired skepticism of someone who had heard 1,000 conspiracy theories. You said you had evidence of friendly fire casualties, Walsh said. Calhoun slid a folder across the table. Inside were photocopies of the intelligence summaries, the memos, the casualty list. Everything he had stolen from the records office. Walsh read in silence. His expression changed. The skepticism disappeared. When he finished, he looked up at Calhoun and said, "This is real?" "Yes." "And you were the pilot? You dropped the bombs?" "Yes." "Why are you coming to me? Why not go through military channels? Because military channels will bury it." "Again." "I want this public. I want the families to know the truth." Walsh closed the folder. He looked troubled. "Mr. Calhoun, if I publish this, the government will come after you. They will destroy your life. Are you prepared for that?" "I do not care about my life. I care about those 87 men. What about their families? Have you thought about what this will do to them? You are going to tell a bunch of widows and children that their heroes were killed by mistake, that the government lied to them for 8 years, that their grief was built on false information. Is that really what you want?" Calhoun had not thought about it that way. He had been so focused on truth and justice and doing the right thing that he had not considered how the truth would land on people who had spent 8 years learning to live with their loss. "They deserve to know," he said, but his voice was uncertain. "Maybe," Walsh said, "but let me ask you something. If you were one of those widows, would you want to know? Would it make your grief easier or harder?" Calhoun did not answer. Walsh slid the folder back across the table. "I am not going to publish this. Not because it is not true, not because it is not important, but because destroying people with the truth is not journalism. It is cruelty. So we just let the government lie? The government lies every day. We report what matters to the public interest. This is a tragedy that will hurt people who have already been hurt enough. My advice is to put these documents back and try to make peace with what happened. Some truths do not need to be told." Walsh stood up and walked out. Calhoun sat alone in the coffee shop with the folder in front of him and felt something collapse inside. He had been so certain that exposing the truth was right. But Walsh was right too. The truth would destroy the families, would take away the one thing that made their loss bearable, the belief that their loved ones died with honor. He took the documents home, hid them in his study, tried to pretend the meeting never happened. 3 weeks later, Calhoun sat at a dinner table in Silver Spring, Maryland, and looked across at Elizabeth Reynolds. She was 39 years old, still wearing her wedding ring 8 years after her husband died. Her daughter Sarah sat beside her. Sarah was 14, dark hair, looked like her father in the one photograph Elizabeth kept on the mantel. The dinner was Margaret's idea. She had become friends with Elizabeth at some school function and decided they should socialize. Calhoun had tried to refuse, but Margaret insisted. So now he sat in the home of a woman whose husband he had killed and tried to smile and eat pot roast and pretend everything was normal. Elizabeth was talking about David. She did that often, according to Margaret. Talked about her dead husband like keeping his memory alive was the only thing holding her together. David always wanted to be a pilot, Elizabeth said. Even as a boy, he would build model airplanes and talk about flying. When the war started, he enlisted immediately. I was terrified, but I was also proud. He was doing something important. Calhoun felt sick. He pushed food around his plate and tried not to look at the photograph on the mantel. They told me he was shot down over Tokyo, Elizabeth continued. Captured by the Japanese. I kept hoping he would survive until the end of the war. Kept hoping I would get a telegram saying he was coming home. But then, in September 1945, they told me he died in captivity. They said it was quick, that he did not suffer much. I hold on to that, the idea that he did not suffer. Calhoun put down his fork. His hands were shaking. Across the table, Margaret was giving him a concerned look. "Are you all right, Robert?" Elizabeth asked. He should tell her. Should say, "Mrs. Reynolds, your husband did not die in captivity. He died in a fire. A fire started by bombs I dropped. He died because command decided his life was acceptable risk. He died screaming in a locked cell while American napalm burned everything around him." He should tell her the truth. But looking at her face, seeing the fragile hope that her husband's death meant something, he could not do it. "I am fine," he said, "just tired." The dinner ended an hour later. Calhoun and Margaret drove home in silence. When they got inside, Margaret turned to him. "What is wrong with you? You have been acting strange for months. Drinking, not sleeping. Tonight you looked like you were going to be sick." Calhoun stood in the entryway of his house and thought about the documents hidden in his study. Thought about 87 names. Thought about Elizabeth Reynolds believing her husband died a hero. "There are things I cannot talk about," he said finally. "Then get help. Talk to someone. Because whatever is eating you is destroying us." She walked upstairs. Calhoun went to his study, took out the documents, read through the casualty list again. 87 names, 87 families who did not know the truth. And Calhoun could not tell them. Because the truth was a bomb that would destroy everything it touched. He put the documents back in the drawer, poured himself a drink. Then another, until the room stopped spinning and sleep finally came like an anesthetic. He had made his choice. He would carry the truth alone. Would let it poison him slowly, rather than spread the poison to people who had already suffered enough. It was not heroic. It was not right. It was just the only choice he could live with. Or, so he told himself. March 15th, 1965. 18:30 hours. Silver Spring, Maryland, the Reynolds residence. 20 years after the war ended, Robert Calhoun stood at Elizabeth Reynolds' front door with a bottle of wine in one hand and the truth folded in his jacket pocket. His wife Margaret was beside him, adjusting her scarf, complaining about the cold. She had no idea this dinner invitation was not a coincidence. Calhoun had engineered it. Called Elizabeth, suggested they get together. Told Margaret it was her idea. He was 49 years old. The drinking had aged him badly. His face was lined and gray. His hands shook unless he had whiskey in his system. Margaret had threatened to leave him twice. His daughter barely spoke to him anymore. The documents from 1953 were still locked in his study drawer, and for 12 years they had been eating him alive from the inside. Elizabeth answered the door. She looked older too, but in a different way, softer, like someone who had learned to live with grief instead of fighting it. Her daughter, Sarah, was 24 now, married, living in Baltimore. Elizabeth lived alone in the house she had shared with David before the war. "Please come in," Elizabeth said. "Dinner is almost ready." The house was small and neat. Photographs of David Reynolds covered every surface. David in his uniform. David standing beside a B-24 bomber. David smiling with Elizabeth on their wedding day. A shrine to a dead man. They sat in the living room with cocktails. Margaret and Elizabeth talked about meaningless things. Weather, neighbors, politics. Calhoun drank and said nothing. The documents in his pocket felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. Dinner was roast chicken. Calhoun ate mechanically. The conversation moved from small talk to memories. Elizabeth told stories about David that she had probably told 100 times. How they met, their first date, the night he proposed. She was smiling, but her eyes were sad in a way that never went away. Then she said something that made Calhoun stop eating. "You know, I got a letter last week from another widow. Her husband was in the same prison camp as David. She wanted to connect, share memories. But when we talked on the phone, her story did not match what the government told me." "What do you mean?" Margaret asked. She said her husband was in Osaka, at a facility near the industrial district. But the telegram I received said David died in a camp outside Tokyo. I always assumed that was where he was held. Calhoun's heart was pounding. He could feel sweat on his forehead despite the cold outside. "Maybe there were multiple camps," Margaret suggested. "Maybe," Elizabeth said. "But it bothers me. 20 years and I realize I do not actually know where my husband died. Just that he died somewhere in Japan. The records are classified. When I asked the Veterans Administration for details, they said information about prisoner facilities is still restricted for national security reasons." She looked at Calhoun. "You flew missions over Japan. Did you ever hear anything about prisoners being held near industrial targets?" The room was silent. Margaret was looking at him. Elizabeth was looking at him. And Calhoun was looking at his plate, because if he looked up, if he met Elizabeth's eyes, he would break. "I do not know," he said quietly. "We just flew the missions. We did not know what was on the ground. It was the same lie he had been telling for 20 years. But this time, sitting across from Elizabeth Reynolds in her house full of photographs, the lie felt different, felt like betrayal. "I suppose it does not matter now," Elizabeth said. "David is gone. Knowing exactly where or how will not bring him back. But sometimes I wonder if the government told us the truth. If maybe there are things they decided we did not need to know." Calhoun stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor. "Excuse me, I need some air." He walked outside. The night was cold and clear. He could see stars. He stood on Elizabeth's front porch and tried to breathe. Behind him, he heard the door open. Margaret came out. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed. "You are being incredibly rude. I cannot do this." "Cannot do what? Eat dinner with a friend? She is not my friend. Her husband is dead because of me." Margaret stared at him. "What are you talking about?" Calhoun pulled the documents from his jacket, handed them to her. "Read it. Read what I did." Margaret unfolded the papers. She read in the porch light. Her expression changed from confusion to horror. When she finished, she looked at Calhoun like he was a stranger. "You killed her husband." "I did not know. Command did not tell us." "But yes, my bombs, my mission. And you have known this for 12 years? You have been sitting on this for 12 years while having dinner with this woman? While pretending to be her friend? I did not know what else to do. You tell her the truth. That is what you do. The truth will destroy her. The lie is destroying you. And us. Robert, I have watched you drink yourself to death for 12 years. I have watched our marriage fall apart. Our daughter barely knows you anymore. And now I find out it is because you have been carrying this." She shoved the documents back at him. "You have two choices. Tell Elizabeth the truth tonight, or I am leaving. I cannot be married to someone who lives like this." She walked back inside. Calhoun stood on the porch holding the papers. His hands were shaking. He thought about going to his car, driving away, disappearing. But he had been running for 20 years and it had not worked. The truth was still there, still poisoning everything. He folded the papers and walked back inside. Elizabeth and Margaret were in the kitchen. The conversation had stopped. The air felt thick with unspoken tension. Calhoun walked past them into the living room. He stood looking at the photographs of David Reynolds, young, smiling, alive. "Mrs. Reynolds," Calhoun said, "I need to tell you something about your husband." Elizabeth came into the room. Her face was uncertain. "What is it?" "I know where he died. I know how he died. And I know why the government will not tell you the truth." He handed her the documents. She looked at them without understanding. Then she started reading. Calhoun watched her face as comprehension arrived, saw the moment when she understood what she was holding. "This says David was in Osaka," she said slowly. "This says he was in a facility near Sector 7. This says prisoners died during a bombing raid on July 28th. Yes. This says American forces bombed that area knowing there were prisoners there. This says command decided not to tell the crews." Calhoun could barely speak. "Yes." Elizabeth looked up at him. Her face was pale. "You were at the Pentagon. You found these documents. Why are you showing them to me?" "Because I was there. I flew that mission, my aircraft, my bombs." The papers fell from Elizabeth's hands. She stared at Calhoun like he had struck her. "You killed David. I did not know. None of us knew. Command kept it classified. But yes, it was my mission." Elizabeth took a step backward. She was shaking. "You have known this? You have come to my house? Had dinner with me? Pretended to be my friend? While knowing you killed my husband? I could not tell you. I tried. I went to the press. They would not publish it. I wrote letters I never sent. I have been trying to figure out how to tell you for 12 years. 12 years. Elizabeth's voice was rising. "You have let me believe for 12 years that my husband died fighting the Japanese, that his death meant something, that he was a hero. And all this time you knew the truth. He was a hero. He survived 17 months in captivity. He endured things most men could not endure. The fact that he died from friendly fire does not change that. Do not tell me what changes it." She was shouting now, tears streaming down her face. "You killed him. You dropped bombs on American prisoners and the government covered it up, and you have been lying to me for 12 years. I am sorry." Calhoun was crying too. "I am so sorry. Sorry does not bring him back. Sorry does not give me back 20 years of believing a lie. Sorry does not fix anything. I know. But you deserve the truth. You deserve to know what really happened." Elizabeth picked up the documents from the floor. She looked at them. At the casualty list, at her husband's name. Then she looked at Calhoun with an expression he would remember for the rest of his life. "Get out of my house. Mrs. Reynolds, get out. Get out and never come back." Calhoun and Margaret left. They drove home in silence. When they got inside, Margaret went upstairs without a word. Calhoun went to his study, poured a drink, then another. He had told the truth. He had done what he thought was right. And it had destroyed everything just like everyone said it would. 3 days later, Calhoun received a letter from Elizabeth's attorney. She was filing a complaint with the Veterans Administration demanding a full investigation into the Osaka bombing. She wanted the government held accountable. She wanted the families of the other 86 men notified. She wanted justice. 2 weeks after that, Calhoun was called to the Pentagon. Colonel Barnes, older now but still in command of records, sat across from him in a conference room with 2 military lawyers. "Major Calhoun," Barnes said, "you disclosed classified information to an unauthorized civilian. That is a federal crime. You are being court-martialed. You will lose your pension. You will likely face criminal charges. What do you have to say for yourself?" Calhoun looked at the 3 men. They were angry, offended that he had broken the rules. But they did not understand. They had not been there, had not dropped the bombs, had not lived with the knowledge. "I would do it again," Calhoun said. The court-martial took 6 months. Calhoun was found guilty of unauthorized disclosure of classified information and conduct unbecoming an officer. He was dishonorably discharged. His pension was revoked. Margaret filed for divorce. His daughter stopped taking his calls, but Elizabeth Reynolds got her investigation. The Veterans Administration was forced to review the Osaka incident. In 1967, 2 years after Calhoun told the truth, the government quietly notified the families of 87 American prisoners that their loved ones had died during an Allied bombing raid. The letters did not apologize, did not explain why the information had been withheld for 22 years, just stated the facts and moved on. Some families were angry, some were devastated. Some said they wished they had never known, but they had the truth. Finally, Calhoun lived alone in a small apartment in Arlington. He worked construction, drank less. The documents that had haunted him for 17 years were no longer his burden. The truth was public. The families knew. The government had been forced to acknowledge what happened. It had cost him everything: his career, his marriage, his family, his future. But looking back, Calhoun could not say he regretted it. Keeping the secret had been killing him. Telling the truth had freed him even if it destroyed him. In 1972, at age 56, Robert Calhoun died of liver failure. He was alone when it happened. No family present, no memorial service. Just a small notice in the newspaper that most people did not read. Elizabeth Reynolds attended the funeral. She was the only one there besides the priest. She did not cry, did not speak, just stood by the grave as they lowered the coffin and then walked away. Years later, when asked why she went, she said something that Calhoun would have appreciated. "He told me the truth when no one else would. I hated him for it. But he was right. I deserved to know. David deserved to have people know how he really died. Major Calhoun gave that to us even though it destroyed his life. I do not forgive him for killing my husband, but I respect what he did after. That took more courage than dropping the bombs. The Osaka incident remains classified in most details. The documents Calhoun stole are still restricted. The government has never formally apologized. The 87 names are listed in the National Prisoner of War Museum in Andersonville, Georgia, with a simple plaque that reads, "Americans who died during Allied operations in Japan 1945. No mention of friendly fire, no explanation of what really happened, just names. Because that is how history works. The comfortable lies get remembered. The ugly truths get buried in classified files. Unless someone decides the truth matters more than comfort, more than career, more than everything." That was Robert Calhoun's choice, and he made it knowing exactly what it would cost.